Hello, this is Christopher Kusich here, presenting my disease presentation for microbiology, the final of the class here in summer 2020. Let's begin. All right, I chose Varicella Zoster virus, also known as the chickenpox. Chickenpox got their name due to the iconic red spot rash that's present all over the body, which were what thought to look like chickpeas. Commonly known as chickenpox, the actual name is Varicella zoster virus. It's a highly contagious respiratory pathogen that is an acute infection, and it was really hard to be distinguished from smallpox for a long time until the end of the 19th century. Um, Signs and symptoms are a rash that's usually going to appear first on children, um, and then fever and malaise on the children. It's usually going to appear on the head first. Adults are going to show the reverse of this, so they're going to have the fever and malaise for a couple days, and then the rash is going to kind of pop up. The rash includes starting from the head, going down to the trunk into the extremities, lesions that are 1 to 4 millimeters in diameter. These lesions, also called vesicles, can rupture and become purulent before drying over and crusting. And when they rupture or if they're scratched open, they can be vectors for secondary infections. Um, Pathogen and virulence factors for VZV. So VZV is able to deal with kind of the immune body's, the immune system's response by dealing with type 1 interferon response. It prevents the induction of the INF stimulated genes, which are ISG, which are these antiviral producers. Um, it does this through the JAK-STAT pathway. It prevents IRF9 degradation and interferes with transcriptional control of viral proteins that manage STAT2 phosphorylation, which just inhibits the body's ability to kind of produce the viral proteins it needs to fight off infection. Another interesting virulence factor that I put on there was the ability to establish this latent infection in the dorsal root ganglia, which can later cause and emerge as shingles later in life. A lot of these kind of factors involve JNK, PI3K, and NGF, which are kind of different proteins, different enzymes and nerve growth factors that have been kind of successful at creating this induction into the dorsal root ganglia. Epidemiology is that chickenpox is it's highly contagious. It's a mild disease. It's not usually fatal, um, especially in the majority of cases, but it's endemic in the population, and this population being the United States, with humans as its reservoir. Main seasons is usually during the winter and early spring. Majority of cases, about 90% are in children under 15. Shingles that just like to add in there is going to occur about 20% of elderly people, usually due to the reactivation of the virus in the dorsal root ganglia. So it's very interesting how that's all kind of connected, can affect you for your whole life. It's transmitted person to person contact via respiratory secretions or direct contact with lesions. It's communicable for 1 to 2 days before or 4 to 5 days after the onset of the rash. These can be longer periods of time for people who are immunocompromised, so they're just a little bit more susceptible. The pathogenesis is going to be entering through the respiratory tract with the conjunctiva, um, and the replication is going to occur there. All the microbes there are going to kind of start to grow and multiply in the nasopharynx and the lymph nodes around that region. And then by 4 to 6 days, primary viremia appears, and we're at a load where really the infection starts to turn, and it's going to start spreading to the rest of the body, notably the sensory root ganglia, and secondary viremia occurs then at this point with that viral infection in the skin that we're seeing. So you can kind of be definitely a little bit more infectious during that primary viremia before you even see any signs of the rash, which is those chickenpox vesicles. Complications, a lot of these complications here, it's important to note that they're less than 1% chance, but especially for children, it's much less opportunity um, for complications, but adults have a higher chance, and usually these are neurological complications such as ataxia, encephalitis. These kind of complications, you know, um, Guillain-Barre syndrome, accepted meningitis, ventriculitis. These things are all affecting kind of like our brain and kind of our nerve pathways. Herpes zoster ophthalmicus. These are other pathways that are going towards our eyes. So these are pretty serious complications. That's researched here. Diagnosis is usually done with the PCR method. Polymerase chain reaction is very cool method using DNA from a sample taken from the patient, and that sample is run and spun down through a machine that can identify the presence of viral DNA. Other ways to identify it is we can use the vesicular fluid in a culture. We can take it from a sample, from like a busted lesion, gather the fluid in the sample, and culture it. This can take a long time, and it's not very it's just labor intensive enough that it's not worth the time wasted. PCR, if PCRs are unavailable, as they are in some countries, direct fluorescent antibody method can be used, but it's a little less sensitive than PCR. Requires more labor. Treatment is usually done at home. It's symptomatic treatment, so acetaminophen, soothing baths, lotions, antihistamines. We want to prevent the scratching so we don't create these secondary infections and we deal with the fever symptoms. More serious cases are treated with the acyclovir. Um, Prevention of VZV, varicella virus, varicella zoster virus is going to be primarily the varicella vaccine created in 1995 from the Oka strain. The Oka strain is a strain of varicella from a healthy child in Japan. Um, and this type of prevention is the best because it causes the body to produce its own antibodies to fight the virus. Um, Children are vaccinated, one dose from, so it's just one shot, ages 1 to 12 years of age, or they get 2 shots if they're over 13. I like to put in there the prevention of shingles. Another interesting product is the Vax for people aged 50 and older. The shingles I think is a really important thing to bring up, just because it is um, the dormant infection in the root ganglia that is really causing a lot of these shingle cases to pop up, and I think that's it's so interconnected you can't leave it out. So chickenpox parties. This is kind of a fun little section here. Just the history. So before 1995, before our vaccine, very popular methods for prevention, other than obviously quarantining and keeping away from people with chickenpox, is actually to intentionally get your kids sick via chickenpox parties. So there'd be one sick child with the chickenpox, and families would bring in the community would bring their healthy children over and get their children sick so that they could get the antibodies in their system to prevent the complications that you can get from chickenpox later in life. As you get older, it's just more advice for prevention. It's just to quarantine, stay away from people with chickenpox. It has a lot higher chance of those complications, which can be pretty bad. Two of the main ones are pneumonia and encephalitis. I mean, these can lead to serious complications and death eventually. I wanted to kind of jump over to my references since I'm running a little out of time. Um, you know, an outbreak of varicella among troops on the move, a challenge in field epidemiology was a great read. I loved it. It kind of discusses an outbreak of chickenpox in a troop during an operation in a military setting, and just a very unique perspective and kind of how that affects military operation is very important. So they're keen on studying it and getting better. And I think that military, a lot of science comes from military study, and a lot of science comes from war study. Um, Another great read was the Cohen Varicella Zoster virus genome, current topics in microbiology and immunology. Really great, just broad. I took a lot of good bits and pieces from Cohen here in 2010. So those are two of my favorite other resources. The rest of them I pulled from bits and pieces, but here's what I wanted to share from you. The complications was also interesting. And I wanted to thank everybody for their time, and I really appreciate you watching my video. Thank you very much.